The next day our march continued on. Finally we had arrived in Kofu. However...
甲府の城がとっくに敵の手に落ちちまってると。
もっと早く着く方法はいくらでもあったんじゃねえの？誰かさんがのんびり酒盛りなんてしてなきゃな。
新八、やめとけって。敵がこんだけ早くたどり着くなんて予想できねえよ、普通は。
しかもこの話を聞いた大使のほとんどが昨夜のうちに脱走してしまったようです。おそらく今残っているのは100人ほどかと。
100人って。
確か江戸を出た時は200人ほどの大使がいたはずですよね。大使の半分以上が逃げ出してしまったということですか。
Everyone stood stunned in quiet resignation. As the creeping dread got the better of me, I looked over at Saito-san to whisper to him. Saito-san, what does that mean for us? Are we going to plan an attack to take over the castle? Saito-san's voice barely hovered above a murmur, so that the other warriors wouldn't overhear him.
それはおそらく無理だ。城を攻めるには少なく見積もっても相手の3倍の兵力がいる。確実な勝利を目指すならば10倍の兵が必要だ。しかもこれは双方の武器が互角の場合、鳥羽伏見で戦った薩長軍のような新型の兵器を持った敵を相手にするのならさらに多くの人員が必要だろう。
Then, when we turned to look at the men in discussion, each captain had their gaze fixed on Kondo-san to await his feedback. Kondo-san, however, uttered a surprising declaration.
撤退はしない。要所に布陣し、敵の出方を待つ。
なんだって？
神から支度金をいただいて出陣したのだぞ。このまま退却しては我々を信頼してくださった幕臣の方々に顔向けできん。諸君らは武士ではないのか。今こそ慶喜公に我々の忠義を示す絶好の機会なのだぞ。
The crowd of freshly recruited soldiers roared in unison as Kondo-san rose to them accordingly.
さすが近藤局長、武士の鏡です。我々にお任せください。粉骨細心、ご公儀のために尽くす所存です。
おい近藤さん、勇ましいのは結構だけどよ、少しは現実ってもんを見てくれよ。向こうがどんだけの軍勢で来てんのかは分かんねえけど、城を取られてる時点でこっちが圧倒的に不利なんだぜ。
長倉君、君は勝てる勝負しかしないつもりかね。その腰に刺しているものは一体何だ。
俺は戦うのが怖えわけじゃねえよ。勝つ見込みがまるでねえ勝負に命なんて張らねえって言ってるだけだ。
The tension became thick in the air, and I was worrying that the situation would escalate into violence before Hijikata-san chimed in.
落ち着け新八。この後合流する予定の部隊が江戸に待機してるか俺が今から呼びに行ってくる。それに敵側もまだ俺たちの正体には気づいてねえはずだ。こっちから仕掛けねえ限り戦になることはねえ。だからあと少しだけ辛抱してくれ。
Nagakura angrily slammed his fist to the ground.
分かったよ。あんたにそこまで言われちゃ仕方ねえよな。
Afterwards, Hijikata-san departed swiftly, making his way back to Edo. Thankfully, the Imperial forces made no attempt to attack us, instead keeping themselves safely fortified within the walls of Kofu Castle. If battle were to ensue, then I was sure that we would all have been likely... If battle were to ensue, then I was sure that we would have all been killed easily, like a wave crashing onto the shore, before reinforcements could arrive. Although our men were intently patrolling the surrounding areas of our camp, we had just above 100 warriors in our ranks, which would do little to starve off an actual attack. Then I saw Saito-san, who appeared a tad meek. Are you alright, Saito-san? Oops. Are you alright, Saito-san? Your skin is so pale.
平気だ。
The color had so thoroughly drained from his skin that I was sure he was soon to faint. Well, you don't look fine. Why don't you take a breather?
他の場所ならいざ知らず、近いうちに戦場となる場所で休めるはずがなかろう。
Well, I suppose... The afternoon sun was blaring in the sky, radiating so intensely my skin felt like it could peel off. Normally, even walking under the sun would have been overwhelming to Saito-san. However, if war were to break out... The hairs on my arms stood at the thought. Just then...
敵兵がこちらに向かってきます。
なんだ、俺たちの正体に気づきやがったか。数はどれくらいいる
10人ほどです。おそらく石膏部隊と思われます。
こっちに向かってきやがるぜ。幸い銃は持ってねえみてえだな。
しょうがねえ。応戦するか。
Nagakura unsheathed his sword and Harada fetched his spear, both of them readying themselves into an offensive stance. Bleh. The Imperial soldiers unsheathed their swords in return, and they sprinted towards us, but...
甘いんだよ
With one quick movement, Nagakura swung his sword, slicing against the abdomens of the incoming soldiers, spilling pints of thick blood against the dirt floor. Dirt floor? Can we not just say ground? Nagakura aimed the tip of his blade to the sternum of the soldier, driving his sword into him with intense forces as the soldier coughed up blood. Without another word, the soldier fell limply to the floor.
よし、一丁上がりった。
Just as Nagakura barked confidently in laughter, the Imperial soldier, who we had presumed to be dead on the floor, laughed eerily. Then, he leapt up, jumping high above Nagakura's body into the air. The soldier took out his sword and swung down.
なんだって
As he parried the approaching katana, Nagakura screamed out in disbelief.
一体どうなってやがるんだ致命傷を負わせたはずなのに生き返ったってことはこいつらまさか
Just then, the eyes of the enemy soldiers flashed a bright shade of crimson.
これは羅刹か。だが何故新政府軍が羅刹を。
くそ、どうなってやがるんだ。羅刹は夜しか動けねえはずだろ。
One after the other, each of the scout troops had their eyes and hair turned red and white respectively.
おのれ、化け物どもめ、覚悟！
Despite their best efforts, our new warriors were all powerless against the Furies, lacking the know-how and skill so necessary to tackle these beasts. There was simply no match, and the Furies slaughtered each of our men without any remorse. These furies came out of nowhere. How could they be here? No, it couldn't be.
素晴らしい成果だ。この日が来るのをずっと待っていた。私の可愛い子供たちが白日のもと力を存分に発揮してくれる日よ。
My worst fears were realized as Father appeared from behind a tall tree. Father seemed to be in a trance as he gazed at each fairy maliciously acting under the light of the sun. His eyes gleamed with madness, and he smiled. Amagiri, who had been standing beside him, however, had a bitter expression as he watched the visceral battle take place.
どれだけ似せたところで、こんなもの所詮は我らのまがいものに過ぎる。日の光を恐れぬようになったとはいえ、おぞましき本質が変わるわけではない。偽りは偽りよ。
お言葉ですが、何が本物で何が偽物かを決めるのもまた曖昧な基準に過ぎません。少なくとも彼らはこの日の本を我が物顔で闊歩する人間どもよりは強い。強さこそは唯一無二の真実です。彼らさえいれば旧幕府軍も新政府軍も、いえ、この国を狙う西洋諸国さえ敵ではありません。この国を狙う者たちを全て滅ぼした後は、再び我ら鬼の時代がやってくるのです。
Amagiri winced at my father's words, as if he were smelling something foul.
おぞましき戦いよ。ここまで強さを冒涜する者を今まで目にしたことがない。
He sighed, closing his eyes in resignation.
くそ！こいつらどんだけ切り刻めば死にやがるんだ。
普通の人間ならとっくにナマスになっててもおかしくねえ頃なのにな。頭にくるぜ。
Both Nagakura and Harada panted heavily, sweat glistening all over their bodies as they continued to slice and weave through the flurry of furies. However, instead of dying, each fury simply rose back up and their wounds healed as expected. As the fatigue began to set in, the furies approached us menacingly, licking their lips as they stared down at us. One of the furies made an attempt to grab my arm. Saito unsheathed his sword hastily, swinging without a second thought at the incoming fury. Much to our dismay, however, the fury's slash wound sealed itself, and he stood up and dusted himself off as if nothing had happened.
やれやれ、このままじゃキリがねえな。じわじわ体力を削られて全滅するのを待つだけだ。
とはいえ全滅ってのは響きが良くねえな。ってことでサイト、事前の手はず通りよろしく頼むぜ。
承知した。
What we discussed?
雪村、あんたは俺と共に来い。もしもの時は二人で先に逃げるよう土方さんに言われている。
But that's not right. We're leaving the other warriors so that we could escape?
あんたがここにいても足手まといにしかならん。いいから来い。
おいおい、もうちょっと言い方考えてやるって。そういうところとことん気が利かねえのな。
俺たちのことは心配しなくていいぜ。分かってんだろ、俺たちがめちゃくちゃ強いってこと。
Harada, Nagakura. I was flushed with guilt, but there was nothing I could do myself to help them, even if I had stayed there. I quickly bowed to the two of them, and Saito-san yanked my arm as we sprinted away together.
「羅刹になった身で日の光の下を歩くのは途方もない苦痛を伴うはず。あの男を突き動かしているものは一体何だ？意地か名誉かはたまた。
お前たち、あの娘を追いなさい。傷を負わせずに生け捕りにするのだ。
My father shrieked his order loudly, which caused a gang of nearby Furies to scream a response before running after us. Saito-san's hair turned white, the color of the Fury. Saito-san, no! You can't use your Fury powers while the sun is still out.
今はそんなことを言っている場合ではあるまい。
Saito-san maneuvered through the Furies with precision, coldly slashing at each Fury until they fell definitively. A lengthy chill shivered through my body. Without any wasted movement, Saito-san sliced into each of the Fury's vital points with a godly display of technique. With each wave of his sword, however, came the splatter of Fury blood all over his porcelain face. To avoid the stinging sin of blood, Saito-san tried covering his mouth and nose all at once with his arm. Then he looked down, his face becoming more pale. At any moment, he looked set to collapse. Saito-san? As I watched these events unfold, I sheepishly called out to him. Saito-san shut his eyes tightly, wiping the blood from off of his face with his sleeve repeatedly.
すまない。急がねばな。
Are you okay? He had transformed into his furry form, and so much blood had been splattered on him. Even I could recognize that Saito-san was showing an incredible amount of discipline and self-restraint that I hadn't thought possible.
だが違い。
He hoped to comfort me, but it was obvious that he was feigning toughness for my sake. With that, I helped him walk forward. Suddenly, I saw the group of Furies gather around us. The mastermind behind this whole plot was...
千鶴、お前はそんなに聞き分けがない娘だったのか。
Father stared back at me with a dejected expression, as I knew my rebellion came as somewhat of a shock to him. Despite knowing he was no longer the father I knew, the man who had raised me, seeing the pain in his eyes made my heart heavy.
私はお前がまだ小さな頃からお前の幸せだけを望んでいたというのに。 こっちへ来なさい。そんな羅刹のことなど放っておいて。
Father's hands, which had so fondly patted my head when I was a child, reached out towards me.
行くな。あなた。
Saito-san spoke between strained breaths. Father, answer me. What is this happiness that you wished for me? I wasn't sure which father I was speaking to. The only way to know was to ask. Father, in turn, offered a maniacal smile.
風間様の妻となり、 純血の鬼の子をたくさん産んでもらうことに決まっているじゃないか。私はそのためだけにお前を育ててきたのだから。
It was strange to think a voice that had given me so much comfort in the past was now the bearer of the news I'd wished to hear least in the world. I'd already known this to be true, but hearing it aloud was like splitting open an old scar in the depths of my heart. To Father, my only worth came to the fact that I could bear Cosmo's demon children. Hot tears began to flow uncontrollably from my eyes. Sorry, Father. I may be a horrible child, but I can't. I just can't make your wish come true. Father's face instantly warped in response. In fact, it was almost unrecognizable. Then,
羅刹ども、そこの女を捕まえなさい。そして風間様へと献上するのです。
Father barked his command towards the Furious with glaring eyes, and like corpses, they dragged their feet to turn around and face us. However, the white-haired beast screeched harshly in unison, and at once they began to charge towards us. Suddenly, Saito-san drew his blade without a sound, and he lunged forward to slay each of the Furies with ease.
泣くのは後にしろ。今は逃げることが先決だ。
Saito-san grabbed a hold of my hand. With his left hand, he held his sword, and as we fled desperately, he swung at the ravenous monsters. I could hear flesh being split, the curdle of blood as it dripped to the floor, and its metallic stench thereafter. Saito-san found himself completely covered in blood, but even so, it didn't stop him. I tightly gripped his hand to pull him back. With whatever strength we had left to muster, Saito-san and I ran in the direction of Edo. We've made it out! Saito-san looked over his shoulder, making sure there were no Furies in sight. After a moment, he nodded and we came to a stop after his confirmation. I found myself out of breath, and it was difficult to speak after running at full stretch for so long.
すまぬ。手を握ったままだったな。
Then Saito-san gently let go of my hand. His breaths were staggered, and he wiped his sweat-covered forehead repeatedly. Saito-san, are you okay?
急ぐぞ。あの羅刹たちの体力は底なしだ。江戸に戻るまで油断はできん。
But by now the blood had almost completely left Saito-san's face, and he could have collapsed at any moment. In addition to the beating heat of the sun, he was drenched in blood from his standoff with the Furies. Standing, let alone sprinting all the way to Edo, must have been excruciating. I said, "Grab onto me." Saito-san, I'll lend you my shoulders. Grab onto me. I could see the perplexion in Saito-san's eyes as I made my suggestion.
心配には及ばん。好意だけ受け取っておく。
Normally I would have listened to Saito-san and been done with it, but... You don't look alright. You're pale. Actually, it looks like you're ready to faint. Stop thinking about my sake for 1 second. Lean on me, please. Saito-san, it seemed, was unkeen to oblige my request. Although he was painting in front of me, although he was panting in front of me, his hands on his knees, he was still attempting to act tough.
平気だと言っている。
Well, like I told you, you don't look fine. Please, just listen to me this one time.
何故俺の体調などを気にかける。あんたの考えることは下世。
Because that day during the Battle of Toba Fushimi, if Saito-san hadn't been with me, then he wouldn't have had to fight Kazuma. Even in Edo, it was my behavior that caused Saito-san to endure a highly dangerous situation. And today, because of the furies that were made by my father, many of our own men were needlessly slaughtered. Time and time again, Saito-san had risked his body to protect me from harm. It frustrated me to know that there was nothing I could say or do to assist him in this dire time. If I could have anticipated that this was going to happen, then I should have left everyone. No. Saito-san. A lot sooner. Sorrow had burrowed itself deep in my heart, and from this sorrow came tears of shame.
何故泣いている。もしや先ほど高堂さんに言われた言葉を思い出したか。先ほどの高堂さんの様子はどう見ても尋常ではなかった。あんたを娘とも思わぬ物言いをしたのは落ち水によって理性をなくしたせいだろう。正気で亡くなったからとてあんたを育ててくれた日々が消えてなくなるわけではあるまい。
It's not bad. I'm not crying because of my father.
では何故だ。
I knew that I had to answer him. But try as I might, the tears were unstoppable, and my mouth quivered as I tried to speak.
急がぬと夜までに江戸にたどり着けぬぞ。さっさと泣きやめ。
I'm sorry.
それは何に対する謝罪だ。あんたに詫びられる覚えなどないが。
I tried wiping my eyes repeatedly with the sleeves of my kimono, but it was a futile effort. It's because it's all my fault that you've become a fury. I mean, even today, look at what my father did to all those warriors. I'm just so sorry, Saito-san! I had a feeling that saying this would only cause Saito-san more strife and conflict, but even so, I knew it was important to express myself. I bowed over and over again in shame. Then, with an albeit awkward movement, Saito-san drew me in closer to him, and my face was pressed against his warm, comfortable chest.
泣きやめと言っているのが聞こえるのか。
His voice tickled my ear softly. There was no harshness or coldness in it. Rather, it was soothing, as if Saito-san sought to comfort a crying child.
あんたは先ほど高堂さんや新型の羅刹の襲撃を受けたのは自分のせいだと言っていたが、あんたを体内に留め置くことに決めたのは我々だ。戦の最中、鬼との戦闘になることは副長も想定していたはず。あんたのせいではない。
As I listened intently to Saito-san's kind words, a different kind of tears altogether began to flow uncontrollably. How could Saito-san be so gentle, so kind, despite having all of these injustices occur to him? He had experienced far more harrowing experiences than I ever had. Hadn't life beaten him down enough for him to begin looking for something else to blame? Like me? I felt the same thing when he returned to the Shinsengumi from the Guardians of the Imperial Tomb. Misinformed soldiers who knew nothing of his character talked behind his back, but he persevered unfazed. Saito-san possessed such strength, and yet he was so thoughtful and compassionate.
あいにく俺は泣いている女の慰め方など知らん。涙を流したとてしてやれることなど何一つない。
I'm sorry. I apologized once more, still keeping my face buried deep in his chest as the tears stuck to his clothing. I couldn't help myself.
だから詫びられる筋合いなどないと言っている。
Saito-san continued to sympathize with me, although it was in his typical flat, stoic manner. Even so, he remained beside me, embracing me tightly and giving me support in my time of need. After returning to Edo, the other captains updated us with the outcome of the battle. As we had expected, there was no way for the new recruits to battle the Furies, as they lacked any real combat experience, let alone Fury experience. The Koryo Regulatory Company was dealt a bad hand, forcing Kondo-san to retreat. The Sacho had strengthened their Furies from what had already been a nearly unstoppable force for the Shinsengumi. For the captains of the Shinsengumi, these improved foes proved to be a great obstacle, making our fates even more tenuous in this fearful, desperate time.